Sarah Matthews pushed her thick-rimmed glasses up her nose as she walked through the crowded hallway of Lincoln High School. Books clutched tightly against her chest. She moved with the careful steps of someone who had learned to avoid drawing attention. Her long brown hair hung like a curtain around her face, and her oversized sweater seemed to swallow her small frame whole. The whispers started before she even reached her locker. "There goes the walking encyclopedia," Jake Morrison snickered to his friends, loud enough for Sarah to hear. His Letterman jacket gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he leaned against the wall with his usual crew of athletes and popular kids. "I heard she actually reads the textbooks for fun," Madison Pierce added, flipping her perfectly styled blonde hair. "Like, who does that?" Sarah's cheeks burned as she fumbled with her combination lock. She had heard worse things about herself over the years. The bookworm, the nerd, the girl who would rather spend Friday night in the library than at parties. What they didn't know was that Sarah had her own Friday night plans, ones that would surprise them more than any textbook ever could. Her father, David Matthews, had been teaching her something far more challenging than algebra or chemistry. Every weekend for the past 3 years, they drove 45 minutes outside town to a private shooting range nestled in the rolling hills of rural Montana. What started as a way for a worried father to teach his daughter self-defense had evolved into something neither of them expected. Sarah had a gift. The first time she picked up a rifle, her father expected the usual beginner's struggle. Missed shots, frustrated sighs, maybe some tears. Instead, Sarah had studied the weapon with the same intensity she brought to her science homework. She asked questions about wind speed, bullet trajectory, and breathing techniques. Within an hour, she was hitting targets that took most people months to master. "You've got a natural eye for this, kiddo," her father had said that first day, unable to hide his amazement as Sarah consistently hit the bullseye from 100 yards. But Sarah wanted more. She read everything she could find about long-distance shooting. She studied weather patterns, learned about different types of ammunition, and practiced her breathing until it became second nature. Her bedroom, already filled with academic awards and science fair trophies, now secretly housed shooting manuals and ballistics charts tucked away in her desk drawer. At school, nobody suspected that the quiet girl who earned perfect grades and ate lunch alone had spent her weekend mornings becoming something extraordinary. They saw her struggle to speak up in class presentations and assumed she was weak. They watched her avoid eye contact in the hallways and labeled her as shy and helpless. Coach Williams, the school's gruff athletics director, had tried multiple times to recruit students for the newly formed rifle team. The school board had approved it as part of an Olympic sports initiative, but finding interested students proved difficult. Most kids were more interested in football or basketball, sports that came with crowds and glory. "We need at least 5 students to keep the program," Coach Williams announced during Monday morning assembly. "The state competition is in 6 weeks, and we don't even have a team yet." Sarah shifted in her seat, her heart racing. She had heard about the competition through her father's connections at the shooting range. The state championship attracted the best young shooters from across Montana, including several who had gone on to compete nationally. The winning distances often exceeded 600 yards, with some competitors successfully hitting targets at 800 yards or more. 800 yards. Sarah had been practicing that distance for months, but joining the team would mean revealing her secret. It would mean stepping out of the shadows she had carefully constructed around herself. It would mean facing the judgment and surprise of classmates who thought they knew exactly who she was. After the assembly, Sarah walked slowly to her next class, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. In advanced physics, she found herself calculating trajectory angles instead of focusing on the lesson about momentum. During lunch, she sat alone as usual, but this time she was lost in thought rather than lost in a book. The decision came to her during 7th period chemistry. Mr. Peterson was explaining the properties of different metals when Sarah realized something important. She had been hiding not just her shooting ability, but herself. She had been so afraid of what others might think that she had forgotten what she was capable of. That afternoon, Sarah made her way to Coach Williams' office. The hallway felt longer than usual, and her palms were sweaty as she knocked on the door. "Come in," the coach's gruff voice called out. Sarah stepped inside the small, cluttered office. Coach Williams looked up from his paperwork clearly surprised to see the quiet honor student standing in his doorway. "What can I do for you, Matthews?" Sarah took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to try out for the rifle team." Coach Williams set down his pen and studied her carefully. Sarah Matthews was not the type of student he usually saw in his office. She was small, quiet, and had never shown interest in any sport. But there was something in her eyes that caught his attention. A determination he hadn't expected. "Have you ever handled a rifle before?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I've been shooting with my father for 3 years. What's the farthest distance you've shot accurately?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment. 800 yards, sir." Coach Williams nearly laughed, but something in Sarah's serious expression stopped him. 800 yards was expert-level distance shooting. Even experienced adult marksmen struggled at that range. The idea that this bookish teenager could handle such a shot seemed impossible. "That's quite a claim, Matthews. I hope you understand that the state competition involves some of the best young shooters in Montana. These aren't casual weekend hunters. Some of these kids have been training since they were 8 years old with professional coaches." "I understand, sir. Tryouts are Wednesday after school. Bring your father's permission slip, and be prepared to prove what you just told me." As Sarah left the office, word of her conversation with Coach Williams spread through the school like wildfire. By the time she reached her locker, small groups of students were already whispering and pointing in her direction. "Sarah Matthews wants to join the rifle team?" Jake Morrison's voice carried down the hallway. "That's the funniest thing I've heard all week." "Oh. She probably thinks shooting is like a video game," Madison added with a laugh. "Someone should tell her it's not done sitting down with a controller." "I give her 5 minutes before she's crying and running home to mommy," another voice chimed in. Sarah kept her head down as she gathered her books. But inside, something had changed. For the first time in her high school career, she wasn't just trying to survive the day, she was preparing for something bigger. That evening at dinner, Sarah told her father about her decision to try out for the rifle team. David Matthews nearly choked on his coffee. "The school rifle team? Sarah, are you sure about this? You know what this means, right? No more quiet weekends at the range. No more keeping this just between us." "I know, Dad. But I'm tired of hiding. I'm good at this. Really good. Why should I be ashamed of that?" David looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. He had watched her transform from a nervous beginner into a skilled marksman over the past 3 years. Her natural ability was undeniable. But he also knew how cruel teenagers could be. He had seen how she struggled with confidence in social situations. "You know they're going to underestimate you," he said gently. "Good," Sarah replied, and for the first time, her father heard steel in her voice. "Let them." Wednesday afternoon arrived with an early autumn chill in the air. Sarah walked toward the school's makeshift shooting range, which had been set up behind the gymnasium. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold but from nervous energy that had been building all day. She could hear them before she saw them. Laughter and confident voices carried across the parking lot as several students gathered around Coach Williams. Sarah recognized most of them, typical athletic types who probably saw this as just another way to add to their sports resume. Well, look who actually showed up," Jake Morrison called out as Sarah approached. "I thought you might change your mind, Matthews." "This should be entertaining," Madison said, though she wasn't even trying out. She had apparently come just to watch what she expected would be Sarah's public humiliation. Coach Williams held up his hand for silence. "All right, listen up. We're going to start with basic safety and handling, then move to accuracy tests at increasing distances. Everyone starts at 100 yards, and we'll see how far you can go." Sarah listened carefully to the safety briefing, though she already knew every rule by heart. She watched as the other potential team members handled their rifles, noting their grip, stance, and breathing patterns. Most of them looked confident enough, but she could see small technical errors that would affect their accuracy at longer distances. The first round of shooting began at 100 yards. Sarah hung back, volunteering to go last. She wanted to observe the others and get a feel for the range conditions. Wind speed, light angle, and temperature could all affect bullet trajectory. And she had learned to factor in these variables instinctively. One by one, the other students took their shots. Most did reasonably well at 100 yards, hitting the target consistently, if not always in the center ring. Jake Morrison scored particularly well, his shots grouped tightly around the bullseye. "Not bad, Morrison," Coach Williams noted. "You've obviously had some practice." "My uncle's been taking me hunting since I was 10, Jake replied with obvious pride. "I know my way around a rifle." Finally, it was Sarah's turn. She approached the firing line, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. Her rifle felt familiar and comfortable in her hands, like an extension of her own body. She had shot this same model hundreds of times with her father. Sarah settled into her shooting position, adjusting her stance until everything felt perfectly aligned. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling for the wind direction and speed. The range was relatively calm, with just a slight breeze from the left that would barely affect her shot at this distance. She opened her eyes, found her target through the scope, and controlled her breathing. Inhale. Exhale halfway. Hold. Squeeze the trigger with steady pressure. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. "Bullseye. Lucky shot," someone muttered behind her. Sarah fired 4 more rounds, each one finding the center of the target with mechanical precision. When Coach Williams called the round complete, Sarah's target showed 5 shots grouped so tightly they could have been covered by a quarter. The laughter and whispers had stopped. "Matthews," Coach Williams said, unable to hide his surprise. "That was exceptional shooting. Let's see how you do at 200 yards. The distance increased, and one by one, the other students began to struggle. What had seemed easy at 100 yards became challenging as the targets grew smaller and environmental factors became more significant. Several students were eliminated when they failed to hit the target consistently. Sarah continued to excel. Her shots at 200 yards were nearly as precise as they had been at 100. By 300 yards, only she and Jake Morrison remained, along with 2 other students who were barely keeping up. "This is impossible," Madison whispered to her friends. "She's actually good at this." At 400 yards, Jake Morrison's confidence finally began to crack. His shots were still hitting the target, but they were scattered around the edges rather than grouped in the center. He kept glancing over at Sarah, who seemed completely unaffected by the increasing difficulty. "How is she doing this?" he muttered to his friend Alex, who had been eliminated at 300 yards. Sarah was in her element now. This was the distance where her countless hours of practice with her father began to show. She had learned to read the subtle signs that most people missed. The way grass moved in the distance told her about wind patterns. The angle of the afternoon light helped her gauge atmospheric conditions. Everything her father had taught her came together in a symphony of precision. At 500 yards, only Sarah and Jake remained. The target was barely visible to the naked eye, requiring careful use of the rifle scope and precise calculations of bullet drop and wind drift. Jake's first shot missed the target entirely. "Take your time, Morrison," Coach Williams called out. "This is where the real challenge begins." Jake's second shot caught the outer ring of the target. His third shot missed again. By the end of the round, he had managed only 2 hits out of 5 shots, and neither was close to the center. Sarah stepped up to the firing line with the same calm demeanor she had shown all afternoon. She took a moment longer to study the conditions. Noting that the wind had shifted slightly and increased in speed, she adjusted her aim accordingly and fired 5 shots in steady succession. All 5 shots hit within the inner rings of the target, with 3 of them grouped tightly around the bullseye. Coach Williams lowered his binoculars slowly. In 30 years of coaching various sports, he had rarely seen such natural talent combined with technical skill. This quiet honor student was outperforming kids who had been shooting competitively for years. "Matthews," he said, his voice carrying a new level of respect. "I think we need to see what you can really do. Let's try 600 yards. A murmur went through the small crowd that had gathered to watch. 600 yards was serious competitive distance, the kind of shooting that separated amateur enthusiasts from true marksmen. Jake Morrison sat down heavily on a nearby bench, clearly overwhelmed by what he had witnessed. The same girl he had been making fun of all week had just outshot him so thoroughly that it wasn't even close. Sarah felt a calm confidence settle over her as she prepared for the 600-yard shot. This was familiar territory. She and her father had been practicing at this distance for over a year, and she had developed an almost intuitive feel for the calculations involved. She studied the target through her scope, making minute adjustments to account for the increased bullet drop at this range. The wind had picked up slightly, requiring her to aim a few inches to the right of where she wanted the bullet to land. Her first shot struck just outside the bullseye, a result that would have been exceptional for most shooters but which Sarah knew she could improve upon. She made a tiny adjustment and fired again. Bullseye. The crowd had grown completely silent. Even Madison Pierce, who had come to mock Sarah's attempt, was watching, with something approaching awe. Sarah fired 3 more shots, each one finding the center of the target with remarkable consistency. When the round was complete, Coach Williams didn't even need to use his binoculars to see the results. 4 of 5 shots were grouped tightly in the center ring, with the 5th just barely outside it. "That's incredible," Coach Williams said, shaking his head in amazement. "Matthews, I've been coaching for 3 decades, and I've never seen shooting like that from someone your age. Where did you learn to shoot like this?" "My father taught me," Sarah replied simply. "We practice every weekend." "Well, your father has done an exceptional job. You're not just on the team, Matthews. You're going to be our anchor shooter at state." As the tryout officially ended and the other students began to pack up their equipment, Sarah found herself surrounded by classmates who had spent years barely acknowledging her existence. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about her shooting background, her training routine, and her plans for the state competition. "Sarah, that was amazing," said Alex Chen, one of the students who had been eliminated earlier. "How long have you been shooting?" "About 3 years, Sarah replied, still feeling somewhat overwhelmed by all the attention. 3 years? That's it? Man, I've been hunting with my dad since I was 8, and you just smoked all of us." Jake Morrison approached more slowly, his earlier arrogance replaced by something closer to respect. "Hey, Matthews," he said quietly. "I owe you an apology. I had no idea you could shoot like that. That was really impressive." Sarah looked at him for a moment, remembering all the snide comments and dismissive looks she had endured over the years. Part of her wanted to throw his words back at him, to make him feel as small as he had made her feel. But mostly, she just felt tired of carrying that anger. "Thank you," she said simply. As the crowd began to disperse, Coach Williams pulled Sarah aside. "Matthews, I want you to understand what just happened here today. You didn't just make the team, you posted some of the best scores I've ever seen at this level. The state competition is going to be a whole different challenge, but if you can shoot like that under pressure, you have a real chance of winning the whole thing." Sarah felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nervousness. "What do I need to do to get ready?" "First, we need to get you properly fitted equipment. The school can provide a competition rifle, but it needs to be calibrated specifically for you. Second, we need to work on your mental game. Technical skill is only part of competitive shooting. The other part is handling pressure when you've got hundreds of people watching and everything's on the line." "I understand, Coach. I also want to meet with your father. If he's been training you to shoot like this, I want to coordinate our efforts. We've got 6 weeks to prepare, and I want to make sure we're using every advantage we have." As Sarah walked back toward the school building, she felt like she was moving through a different world than the one she had inhabited that morning. Students she had never spoken to nodded respectfully as she passed. Teachers who had seen her only as a quiet academic were looking at her with new interest. But perhaps the most significant change was the one she felt inside herself. For the first time in her high school career, Sarah Matthews was not trying to hide. She had stepped into the light and discovered that she was much stronger than she had ever imagined. The snickering had stopped. The dismissive comments had ended. And in 6 weeks, Sarah would have the chance to show not just her school, but the entire state, exactly what the nerdy girl could do. The weeks following tryouts transformed Sarah's entire high school experience in ways she never could have anticipated. What had once been a place where she moved through the halls like a ghost suddenly became an environment where she commanded genuine respect and curiosity from her peers. Coach Williams wasted no time in setting up a meeting with Sarah's father. The following Saturday morning, David Matthews found himself sitting in the school's athletics office, discussing his daughter's shooting abilities with a man who was still processing what he had witnessed during tryouts. "Mr. Matthews, I'll be direct with you," Coach Williams said, leaning forward across his desk. "In 30 years of coaching various sports, I've rarely encountered natural talent like your daughter possesses. But talent alone won't win at state. These kids she'll be competing against have been training with professional coaches, using thousands of dollars worth of specialized equipment, and many of them have been shooting competitively since elementary school." David nodded thoughtfully. "What do you think Sarah needs to succeed?" "Honestly, she needs to learn how to handle pressure on a completely different level. Our weekend practices are one thing, but state competition is something else entirely. There will be hundreds of spectators, media coverage, college scouts, and Olympic development program recruiters watching. Some of these kids crack under that kind of pressure, even with years of competitive experience." "Sarah's always been mentally tough," David replied. "She doesn't rattle easily." "That's good to hear, because we're about to find out just how tough she really is." Coach Williams outlined an intensive training program that would consume most of Sarah's free time over the next 5 weeks. Daily after-school practice sessions, weekend competitions at neighboring schools, and specialized coaching in areas like sports psychology and competitive strategy. "There's something else," Coach Williams added. "Word about Sarah's performance is spreading beyond our school. I've already received calls from 3 college recruiters asking about her. If she performs well at state, this could open doors to scholarships and opportunities she probably hasn't even considered." David felt a mixture of pride and concern. His weekend shooting lessons with Sarah had started as a simple father-daughter activity focused on safety and self-confidence. He never imagined it would lead to this level of competitive possibility. Meanwhile, Sarah was experiencing her own transformation in the classroom and hallways of Lincoln High School. Teachers who had known her only as a quiet honor student were suddenly showing new interest in her achievements. Her physics teacher, Mr. Peterson, spent extra time discussing ballistics and trajectory calculations, fascinated by the practical application of classroom concepts. "Sarah, I'd love for you to give a presentation to my advanced physics class about the mathematics involved in long-distance shooting," he suggested after class one day. "It's a perfect real-world example of the principles we've been studying." 6 months earlier, the thought of standing in front of a class and speaking would have terrified Sarah. Now, she found herself looking forward to the opportunity to share something she was passionate about. The presentation went better than anyone expected. Sarah explained wind drift calculations, bullet trajectory formulas, and the physics of projectile motion with a confidence and expertise that impressed both students and faculty. Jake Morrison, who was in the advanced physics class, found himself taking notes as Sarah explained concepts that suddenly made sense in practical terms. "That was really cool, Sarah," he said after class. "I never realized how much math was involved in shooting." "Everything involves math if you look deep enough," Sarah replied with a small smile. "You just have to find the right application." Well, but Sarah's real transformation was happening on the shooting range. Coach Williams had arranged for her to train with the school's new competition rifle, a precision instrument that cost more than most families spent on a car. The rifle had been donated by a local business owner who was a shooting enthusiast, and it represented technology Sarah had only read about in magazines. The first time Sarah held the competition rifle, she understood immediately why serious shooters invested in such equipment. Every component was engineered for accuracy. The trigger broke cleanly with minimal pressure. The stock was adjustable to achieve perfect fit, and the scope offered clarity that made her father's rifle seem primitive by comparison. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered as she adjusted the rifle's cheek rest and length of pull to match her build. "It's a tool that matches your skill level," Coach Williams replied. "But remember, the equipment doesn't make the shooter. You still have to perform." Sarah's first practice session with the competition rifle took place on a cold Thursday afternoon. The school's range had been extended to accommodate longer distances, with new targets set up at 700 and 800 yards. Coach Williams wanted to see if Sarah could maintain her accuracy at the maximum distances she would face at state competition. The difference in her performance was immediate and dramatic. Shots that had been challenging with her father's rifle became routine with the competition equipment. At 700 yards, Sarah consistently placed shots within the inner rings of the target. At 800 yards, she maintained accuracy that had Coach Williams shaking his head in amazement. "This is unbelievable," he muttered as he examined her target through binoculars. "You just put 4 shots in a group that could be covered by a dinner plate at 800 yards. Some of the kids at state last year couldn't do that at 600. But perhaps the most significant development was the change in how Sarah carried herself around school. The quiet, invisible girl, who had spent 3 years trying not to be noticed, was gradually being replaced by someone who walked with purpose and confidence. She still preferred books to parties, still earned perfect grades in her academic classes, but now she did these things as choices rather than defaults. The transformation didn't go unnoticed by her classmates. Madison Pierce, who had spent years dismissing Sarah as irrelevant, found herself in the unusual position of trying to start conversations with someone she had previously ignored. "Sarah, I heard you might get recruited by colleges for shooting," Madison said one day as they stood in line for lunch. "That's so cool. I didn't even know colleges had shooting teams." "Some do," Sarah replied politely. "The University of Alaska has one of the best programs in the country." "Alaska? Wow. Would you really want to go that far from home?" Sarah considered the question seriously. A year ago, the idea of leaving Montana would have terrified her. Now, the possibility of competing at the collegiate level and pursuing advanced studies in a field she was passionate about seemed like an exciting adventure rather than a frightening prospect. "I think I'd like to see what else is out there," Sarah said finally. As word of Sarah's abilities spread throughout the school and community, she began receiving attention from sources she never expected. The local newspaper wanted to do a feature story about the unknown sharpshooter from Lincoln High School. A sporting goods store in town offered to sponsor her equipment needs. Most surprisingly, Sarah received a phone call from a former Olympic shooter who lived 2 hours away and offered to provide specialized coaching. "Sarah, this is becoming bigger than any of us anticipated," her father said one evening as they discussed the various opportunities and requests. "Are you sure you're ready for this level of attention?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. The shy, bookish girl who had started high school 3 years ago would have been overwhelmed by such attention. But the person she was becoming felt capable of handling whatever challenges lay ahead. "I'm ready, Dad. I've been hiding for too long. If I can do this, if I can compete at this level, then I want to see how far I can go." David Matthews looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. The quiet teenager who had been so nervous during her first shooting lesson had developed into someone with genuine confidence and ambition. The transformation went far beyond marksmanship skills. Meanwhile, Coach Williams was dealing with his own challenges in preparing for the state competition. The other students who had made the rifle team were solid shooters, but Sarah's exceptional ability created an unusual dynamic. She was clearly the team's best hope for success, which put enormous pressure on someone who had never competed in any sport before. "Sarah, I want to talk to you about strategy for state," Coach Williams said during one of their private training sessions. "You're going to be the target that everyone else is aiming for. Once word gets out about your abilities, other teams are going to be specifically preparing to beat you." "What does that mean practically?" "It means you need to be ready for mind games, distractions, and tactics designed to shake your confidence. Some competitors will try to psych you out with comments about your age, your experience, or your school's lack of shooting tradition. You need to be mentally prepared for that." Sarah nodded seriously. "How do I prepare for something like that?" "Visualization and mental conditioning. We're going to practice shooting under artificial pressure conditions. Loud noises, distractions, people making comments while you're trying to concentrate. If you can maintain your accuracy under those conditions, the actual competition will feel manageable." The specialized training began immediately. Coach Williams recruited volunteers to create distracting environments during practice sessions. They played loud music, had conversations near the firing line, and even arranged for people to make discouraging comments while Sarah was shooting. The first few sessions were challenging. Sarah found her concentration broken by unexpected noises, and her confidence shaken by negative comments. Even when she knew they were artificial, her shot groups became less consistent, and her scores dropped noticeably. "This is harder than I expected," Sarah admitted, after a particularly difficult practice session. "It's supposed to be hard," Coach Williams replied. "If we can teach you to shoot well under these conditions, the actual competition will feel easy by comparison." Gradually, Sarah learned to create a mental bubble around herself during shooting. She developed techniques for blocking out distractions and maintaining focus regardless of what was happening around her. Her scores began to improve again, and eventually, she was shooting as well under pressure as she had in quiet conditions. The breakthrough came during a practice session when Coach Williams arranged for a group of students to gather near the range and provide a running commentary on Sarah's shooting. Their comments were designed to be distracting and discouraging. "She's just lucky," one student said loudly enough for Sarah to hear. "Wait until she faces real competition. I heard the other schools have professional coaches," another added. "She's just a beginner who got lucky a few times." Sarah felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her stomach as she prepared for her first shot. The comments were getting to her, making her second-guess her abilities and question her preparation. But then she remembered something her father had told her during one of their early shooting sessions. "The target doesn't care about your feelings," he had said. "It doesn't care if you're nervous or confident, young or experienced. The target only responds to precision and technique. Focus on what you can control." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, centering herself on the familiar routine of breathing and concentration that had become second nature. When she opened them, the distracting voices seemed to fade into background noise. She found her target, controlled her breathing, and fired. Bullseye. She fired 4 more shots in quick succession, each one finding the center of the target despite the continuing commentary from the sidelines. When the round was complete, the distracting voices had stopped entirely. "Outstanding," Coach Williams said with genuine admiration. "That's exactly the kind of mental toughness you'll need at state." Sarah felt a surge of confidence that was different from anything she had experienced before. It wasn't just about her shooting ability anymore. She had proven to herself that she could perform under pressure, that she could maintain focus and precision even when people were actively trying to undermine her confidence. As the state competition drew closer, Sarah's preparation intensified. She was practicing 6 days a week, studying weather reports and wind patterns for the competition venue, and working with the former Olympic coach, who had volunteered to help with her final preparations. The Olympic coach, Maria Santos, had competed internationally for 15 years and brought a level of expertise that impressed even Coach Williams. During their first session together, she watched Sarah shoot and immediately identified areas for improvement that no one else had noticed. "Your technique is excellent," Maria told Sarah after observing several rounds of shooting. "But you're still thinking too much during the shot sequence. The best shooters operate on pure muscle memory and instinct. Conscious thought actually interferes with precision at the highest levels." Under Maria's guidance, Sarah learned to trust her subconscious mind to handle the technical aspects of shooting, while her conscious mind remained calm and focused. The improvement was subtle but significant, shaving crucial points off her scores and making her accuracy even more consistent. "You have genuine potential to compete at the national level," Maria told Sarah during their final training session. "If you perform at state the way you've been shooting in practice, college coaches are going to take serious notice." 3 days before the state competition, Sarah participated in her final practice session at Lincoln High School. Coach Williams had arranged for the entire rifle team to shoot a simulated competition round under conditions as close as possible to what they would face at state. Sarah's performance was flawless. She shot perfect scores at every distance from 300 to 800 yards, displaying a level of consistency that had her teammates staring in amazement. Even Jake Morrison, who had initially been skeptical of her abilities, was openly expressing admiration. "Sarah, you're going to dominate at state," he said after watching her final round. "These other schools have no idea what's coming." But Sarah wasn't thinking about domination or victory. She was thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. A year ago, she had been a quiet, invisible student who avoided attention and doubted her own abilities. Now, she was preparing to compete against the best young shooters in Montana with a realistic chance of winning. The transformation had been about much more than learning to shoot accurately. Sarah had discovered confidence, purpose, and a sense of her own capabilities that extended far beyond marksmanship. She had learned to handle pressure, to trust her abilities, and to step into challenges rather than hiding from them. As she cleaned and stored her rifle after that final practice session, Sarah felt ready for whatever the state competition might bring. She had done the work, mastered the skills, and developed the mental toughness necessary to compete at the highest level. The girl who had once been dismissed as just another bookish nerd was about to show the entire state of Montana what she was truly capable of achieving. The Montana State High School Rifle Championship took place at the sprawling Yellowstone Shooting Complex, a facility that hosted everything from Olympic trials to international competitions. Sarah had visited the complex once with her father the previous summer, but seeing it filled with competitors, coaches, media personnel, and spectators was an entirely different experience. Teams from across Montana had arrived for the 3-day competition, each bringing their best shooters and highest hopes. Sarah watched as buses from schools she had only heard of in sports broadcasts unloaded students carrying expensive rifle cases and wearing matching team uniforms that spoke of years of competitive tradition. Lincoln High School's team looked modest by comparison. Their equipment was good but not flashy. Their uniforms were simple school colors, and their experience was limited. Sarah, Jake Morrison, Alex Chen, and 2 other students comprised a team that most people expected to finish in the middle of the pack at best. "Look at some of these setups," Alex whispered as they walked past the team preparation areas. "That's the Billings Central team. I heard they have 3 shooters who placed in the top 10 nationally last year." Sarah observed the other teams with interest, rather than intimidation. The Billings Central shooters moved with the practiced confidence of athletes who had been competing for years. Their rifles were pristine, their equipment was organized with military precision, and their coach was a former Marine who ran their practices like boot camp. "They look serious," Jake noted, somewhat nervously. "So do we," Sarah replied calmly, though she was carefully studying their technique and preparation routines. Coach Williams gathered the Lincoln team for a final briefing in their assigned preparation area. "All right, everyone, listen carefully. Today is about executing what we've practiced. Don't worry about what the other teams are doing or what their experience level might be. Focus on your own shooting and support your teammates." He looked directly at Sarah. "Matthews, there's going to be extra attention on you today. Word has spread about your abilities, and people are curious to see if the rumors are true. Use that energy positively, but don't let it distract you from your routine." Sarah nodded, feeling surprisingly calm despite the magnitude of the situation. The weeks of pressure training with Coach Williams had prepared her for exactly this kind of environment. The noise, the crowds, and the competitive atmosphere felt manageable rather than overwhelming. The competition format was straightforward but demanding. Shooters would compete at 4 different distances: 300, 500, 700, and 800 yards. Each distance required 5 shots, with scoring based on accuracy and precision. The cumulative score across all distances would determine individual and team rankings. As the first round began at 300 yards, Sarah found herself positioned next to Rebecca Torres from Billings Central, a senior who had been shooting competitively for 6 years and was considered one of the favorites to win the individual championship. "First time at state?" Rebecca asked as they set up their rifles, her tone friendly but with an undertone of competitiveness. "Yes," Sarah replied honestly. "It shows. You look nervous." Sarah considered correcting her, since she actually felt quite calm, but decided it might be advantageous if her competitors underestimated her emotional state. Instead, she simply focused on adjusting her rifle and checking her equipment. The first shots of the day rang out across the complex as the 300-yard round began. Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar comfort of the rifle against her shoulder and the precise alignment of her body that had become second nature through months of practice. Her first shot at 300 yards struck dead center of the bullseye, earning a perfect score. She heard a small intake of breath from Rebecca Torres beside her, who had placed her shot in the outer rings of the target. Sarah's second shot matched the first, as did her third, fourth, and fifth. When the round was completed, she had shot a perfect score at 300 yards, placing all 5 shots within a group that could be covered by a silver dollar. Perfect score for Sarah Matthews from Lincoln High School. the range announcer called out, and Sarah heard a ripple of surprise go through the crowd of spectators. Rebecca Torres was staring at Sarah's target with something approaching disbelief. "That was incredible shooting." "Seven quote," she said, her earlier condescension replaced by genuine respect. "I've never seen grouping that tight from someone our age." The second round at 500 yards proved more challenging for most competitors. The increased distance revealed technical flaws that had been hidden at shorter ranges, and several shooters who had performed well in the first round began to struggle. Sarah's performance remained consistent. She took slightly longer to study the conditions at 500 yards, noting a crosswind that would require adjustment to her aim point. But her shots continued to find the center of the target with remarkable precision. 4 perfect scores and 1 shot just barely outside the bullseye gave her another near-perfect round. By this point, the attention around Sarah's shooting position had intensified dramatically. College recruiters were taking notes, coaches from other teams were openly staring, and even competitors who weren't shooting were gathering to watch her technique. "Who is that girl?" Sarah heard someone ask behind her. "Sarah Matthews from Lincoln High." "Nobody's ever heard of her before this year. But she's shooting like a seasoned pro." "Lincoln High. They don't even have a shooting tradition." "Where did she come from?" 70 on a matter. 70 on a matter. 70 on a matter. 70 on a matter. During the break between rounds, Coach Williams pulled Sarah aside. "How are you feeling?" "Good," Sarah replied honestly. "Really good. The rifle is performing perfectly, and the conditions are actually easier than some of our practice sessions. Sarah, you're currently in first place by a significant margin. If you maintain this level of shooting through 700 and 800 yards, you're going to win this thing." "Are you ready for that?" Sarah considered the question seriously. Winning the state championship would mean media interviews, scholarship offers, and a level of attention she had never experienced. But more than that, it would represent the complete transformation of how she saw herself and her capabilities. "I'm ready, Coach." The 700-yard round separated the serious competitors from those who were simply participating. The target was barely visible to the naked eye, requiring precise scope work and careful calculation of environmental factors. Many shooters who had performed respectably at shorter distances began to struggle significantly. Sarah approached the 700-yard line with the same methodical preparation she used for every shot. She studied the wind flags placed at intervals between her position and the target, noting subtle changes in wind direction and speed. She checked the angle of the late afternoon sun and adjusted her scope accordingly. Her first shot at 700 yards struck just outside the center ring, a result that would have been excellent for most shooters but which Sarah knew she could improve upon. She made a tiny adjustment to compensate for what she had learned from that first shot, and fired again. Bullseye. Her remaining 3 shots continued to find the center of the target with almost mechanical precision. When the round was completed, Sarah had posted the highest score of any competitor at 700 yards, extending her lead over the rest of the field. Rebecca Torres, who had been keeping pace reasonably well through the earlier rounds, struggled significantly at 700 yards. 2 of her shots missed the target entirely, effectively ending her chances of winning the individual championship. "This is unbelievable," Rebecca said as she watched Sarah's final shots. "You're shooting like someone who's been competing for a decade. How long did you say you've been shooting?" 3 years, Sarah replied. 3 years? That's impossible. Nobody shoots like this with only 3 years of experience. But Sarah's most significant challenge still lay ahead. The final round at 800 yards was where championships were won or lost, where the difference between good shooters and great ones became most apparent. At this distance, even minor errors in technique or judgment could result in complete misses. As Sarah prepared for the 800-yard round, she noticed that the crowd around the shooting positions had grown considerably. Word of her performance had spread throughout the complex, and people were curious to see if the unknown sophomore from Lincoln High School could maintain her exceptional shooting under the maximum pressure of the final round. "Ladies and gentlemen," the range announcer said as the 800-yard round began, "we're about to witness the conclusion of one of the most remarkable individual performances in recent state championship history. Sarah Matthews from Lincoln High School currently holds a commanding lead. But the 800-yard round has humbled many confident shooters in the past. Sarah blocked out the announcement and focused on her preparation routine. 800 yards was a distance she had practiced extensively with her father and Coach Williams, but never under these conditions. The pressure was unlike anything she had experienced, with hundreds of people watching her every move. She settled into her shooting position and began her familiar sequence of breathing and concentration. Through her scope, the target looked impossibly small and distant. A slight miscalculation or momentary lapse in focus could send her shot wide of the target entirely. Sarah's first shot at 800 yards struck the outer edge of the center ring, a result that would have thrilled most competitors but which Sarah recognized as slightly off her intended aim point. She had overcompensated for the wind, which had decreased slightly since her practice shots. She made a small adjustment and fired her second shot. Dead center bullseye. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, startling Sarah slightly as she prepared for her third shot. She had become so focused on the shooting that she had forgotten about the spectators entirely. The noise was both energizing and distracting, requiring her to dig deep into the mental training she had received from Coach Williams. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, centering herself in the quiet space she had learned to create regardless of external conditions. When she opened them, the target seemed to come into sharp focus while everything else faded into background noise. Her third shot matched the second, striking the center of the target with authority. Her fourth shot grouped tightly with the previous two, and her fifth shot completed a cluster of hits that had the crowd cheering wildly and coaches shaking their heads in amazement. Perfect score at 800 yards for Sarah Matthews, the announcer called out, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. In 15 years of covering state championships, I have never seen shooting of this caliber from a high school competitor. As Sarah set down her rifle and stepped back from the firing line, the reality of what she had accomplished began to settle in. She had not just won the individual state championship, she had dominated it in a way that left no doubt about her abilities. Coach Williams reached her first, wrapping her in a bear hug that lifted her off her feet. Sarah, that was the most incredible shooting I've ever witnessed. You didn't just win. You set records that might not be broken for years. Her teammates surrounded her with congratulations and amazement. Jake Morrison, who had struggled through the longer distances but had shot respectably overall, looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. Sarah, you just outshot kids who've been training since elementary school, he said. Some of these teams have professional coaches and unlimited budgets, and you beat all of them with 3 years of weekend practice with your dad. But perhaps the most meaningful congratulations came from her father, who had driven down to watch the final rounds. David Matthews had tears in his eyes as he hugged his daughter, overwhelmed by pride and amazement at the journey they had shared. I'm so proud of you, kiddo, he whispered. Not just for the shooting, but for having the courage to step out of the shadows and show everyone who you really are. As the awards ceremony began, Sarah found herself standing on the top step of the podium, looking out at a crowd that included college recruiters, Olympic Development Program scouts, and reporters from several major newspapers. The quiet, invisible girl who had spent years trying not to be noticed was now the center of attention at the state's premier shooting competition. The gold medal felt surprisingly heavy as it was placed around her neck, but not as heavy as the knowledge of how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, Sarah Matthews had been just another bookish student who avoided attention and doubted her own abilities. Now, she was the Montana State High School rifle champion and a serious candidate for college scholarships and national competition opportunities. During the media interviews that followed the ceremony, Sarah found herself surprisingly comfortable speaking about her shooting background and future plans. The same girl who had once been terrified to speak in front of her physics class was now confidently answering questions from reporters and college coaches. Sarah, your performance today was historic, said a reporter from the Montana Standard. What's next for you? Are you planning to pursue shooting at the collegiate level? I'm considering all my options, Sarah replied thoughtfully. This experience has shown me that I'm capable of more than I ever imagined. I want to see how far I can take this talent. Do you have any advice for other students who might be hiding their own abilities? Sarah considered the question carefully, thinking about her own journey from invisible student to state champion. Don't be afraid to step into the light, she said finally. You might be surprised by what you're capable of when you stop hiding from yourself. As the formal events concluded and teams began packing up their equipment, Sarah found herself approached by Rebecca Torres, the Billings Central shooter who had competed beside her during the early rounds. "Sarah, I wanted to congratulate you properly," Rebecca said. "What you did today was incredible. But more than that, you handled yourself with real class. You could have been arrogant or dismissive, but you stayed humble and focused throughout the entire competition." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "That means a lot coming from you. I graduate this year, but I'll be watching to see what you do at Nationals, because there's no question you'll be competing at that level soon." The drive back to Lincoln that evening was quiet, with Sarah sitting in the passenger seat of her father's truck, her gold medal and trophy secured safely in the back seat. The Montana countryside rolled past in the gathering dusk, as father and daughter processed the magnitude of what had occurred. "Dad," Sarah said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yeah, kiddo? Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself." David Matthews glanced over at his daughter, seeing not just the state champion she had become but the confident young woman she was continuing to grow into. "You did this yourself, Sarah. I just gave you the opportunity to discover what was already there." When Sarah walked into Lincoln High School the following Monday morning, everything had changed once again. But this time, the change felt different. Instead of the surprise and curiosity that had followed her tryout performance, there was now genuine respect and admiration from students and faculty alike. The trophy case near the main office had been rearranged to prominently display Sarah's state championship medal and trophy, along with a newspaper clipping featuring her photograph, and the headline, "Local Student Dominates State Shooting Championship." Jake Morrison approached her at her locker, but his manner was completely different from their interactions just months earlier. "Sarah, I saw the article about you getting recruited by Alaska and Montana State. That's incredible. It's pretty exciting," Sarah agreed. "I never imagined this is where those weekend shooting sessions with my dad would lead." "You know what I think is coolest about all this?" Jake said. "You proved that it doesn't matter what people think they know about you. You showed everyone that there's always more beneath the surface." As Sarah walked through the hallways of Lincoln High School, she reflected on the complete transformation of her high school experience. The girl who had once been dismissed as just another nerdy bookworm had become someone who commanded respect not through academic achievement alone, but through the courage to pursue excellence in an unexpected arena. But perhaps the most important transformation was the one that had occurred within Sarah herself. She had discovered that stepping out of the shadows and embracing challenge was not something to fear but something to celebrate. She had learned that her true capabilities extended far beyond what she had ever imagined possible. The snickering had indeed stopped. The dismissive comments had ended. And Sarah Matthews had proven that the quiet girl with thick glasses and a love for books was also a champion who could hit an 800-yard target without blinking. As she prepared for her next challenge, whatever that might be, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that she was capable of achieving things that once seemed impossible. The girl who had hidden in the shadows had stepped fully into the light, and the view from there was extraordinary.